All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today. This webinar is part of our new Exploring Election Audit series. And before I get started, let me just mention we do have a Q&A feature that's going to be available for participants to ask questions of our experts here today during the Q&A section of our presentation. I also just want to give those of you that are maybe new to the elections group, I just want to give a brief overview of our organization. If you're joining us for the first time, the elections group is a nonpartisan election administration consulting firm. We're a team of election experts supporting election professionals, just like those that are joining us today. We do that through promoting collaboration, fostering thought leadership, and elevating best practices through the development of training materials and other resources. We have a lot to cover today, but I do want to start with some introductions. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jennifer Morrell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Elections Group. I spent about 10 years running local elections in both Utah and Colorado, and I've spent a number of years providing resources and support to folks throughout the elections community across the country. And joining me today, well, let's do a proper introduction here. In 2022, the Colorado County Clerks Association released some recommendations to help Colorado's already robust and stellar election model. These included things like proper funding for elections, voter list maintenance review, making ballot images and CVRs publicly available, and it also included signature verification audits. Our webinar today will focus on Colorado's signature verification audit pilot program, and I emphasize pilot. We'll reference the elections group Exploring Election Audits Part 2 report, conducting a mail ballot validation audit. That's a mouthful. A link to this resource is in the chat. We're also going to drop a link to our Exploring Audit series. So before we let all of you introduce yourself, one of the things I wanted to mention is I've done work now or attended election conferences in just about every state in the country. And it won't surprise all of you that Colorado is frequently mentioned in the same breath as words like best practices and gold standard. And I think when we talk about a state generally like that, sometimes we forget that behind all the awesomeness of Colorado elections are amazing people doing amazing work, and that couldn't be more true than for the four of you. Your leadership, your willingness to collaborate, to innovate, and to mentor those around you. I know you have a lot of new clerks that came in. Is really remarkable, and so it's just an honor for me today to have you join us. So Matt, let's start with you, and then we'll kind of go around the room if you'll tell us a little bit about your role and your work.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Well, depending on where you are in the country, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Matt Crane. I'm the executive director of the Colorado County Clerks Association. I've been an election administration professional in Colorado since 2000, including serving as the elected clerk and recorder in Arapahoe County, which I think is Colorado's third or fourth largest county in the Denver metro area. Since my term expired, I've moved on to consulting roles, whether it's with the federal government, helping other states conduct elections, and then my role here as the executive director of the County Clerks Association. So thanks for being here today. Jen, thanks for the invitation. Super excited for this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Todd?
Thank you, Jen. I'm Todd Davidson. I've been in elections since 2014, and I've worked under a couple of these folks, Matt and Jennifer. I am the elections director in Denver County.
Thanks, Todd. Regina?
Hi, my name is Regina O'Brien. I am the clerk and recorder in Eagle County, Colorado, which is a medium-sized county about 2 hours directly west of Denver International Airport, so up in the ski area. I've been in the clerk's office since 2013 as chief deputy, and then the clerk starting in 2016. Elections have definitely changed over that period of time, which has been really exciting and fun to be part of those innovations. Eagle County is roughly 37,000, 38,000 registered voters, to give you an idea of our size. We're just a tiny bit smaller than Denver County.
Thanks, Regina. And Lori.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Lori Mitchell. I'm the Chaffee County Clerk and Recorder, and we are located in beautiful Salida, Colorado. It is the heart of the Rockies, so we get all the best of Colorado here. I started working in the clerk's office in 2011, and I was elected county clerk in 2014. Started in elections, so that is where I like to work and develop best practices. So I'm really excited about being on this panel today.
Awesome. Thanks, Lori. One of the things that we learned as we were doing audit workshops, as the elections group was doing audit workshops, is that you have to have standards in place in order to audit against those. So before we even get into the signature verification audit program, Regina, let's start with you. Can you take us through how signature verification works in Colorado generally?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I'll give you a high level view because there can be some variances depending on, as I mentioned, like the size of the county. So as many of you are probably aware, Colorado is a vote by mail state, and our signature verification process is an integral part to our election model. When a ballot comes in, it is received by our judges. How it works in Eagle County is we have a receiving machine, a run-back machine that captures the image of the signature on a voter's return envelope. And we do not do an automatic signature verification process. I'll leave that to Todd to speak to. Our process is done through teams of election judges. So we call it tier 1. So our first phase of signature verification is our citizen election judges. They will look at the image of the signature on the return envelope, and they will compare that image to historical images in a voter's registration record. If the judge at tier 1 sees a match, then that ballot is accepted and it will go on to the counting room deconstruction and to the counting room. If our tier 1 judge does not see a match, they can challenge or we don't necessarily want to say reject, but they challenge that image and they're escalating it to tier 2. And so then in tier 2, we have a bipartisan team of different signature judges, and we want to make sure that it's not the same judge who audited in the first round. And in our county, those judges take the physical ballot and they compare that signature on the ballot again to the reference images in the voter's registration record. And there's probably more reference images in there than most voters would think. I know when I first started in this office, I thought, how could they have, where were they getting these signatures? And there was a robust number of signatures captured. So our judges can use those. And with that tier 2 verification, if one of the judges, current Colorado law is one judge, if that judge agrees that it should move on, it will move on. If they both disagree that it's not a match, then we will hold that ballot back. It doesn't go to the counting room, but it doesn't mean that all hope is lost for the voter. Our process then requires that we send out a letter to the voter, whether it is a signature discrepancy or whether there's a missing signature on the voter's return envelope. We send a letter to that voter. In our county, if there is a email address in the voter's record, we'll also reach out by email. We do everything we can to get a hold of the voter, and the voter has an opportunity to cure that signature discrepancy, and they have until 8 days after the election to cure. So that is a very high level overview of the SIGVER process for Colorado and specifically how we do it in Eagle County.
Regina, that was fantastic. I wish I was taking notes. Todd, Lori, you both work in a larger and smaller jurisdiction, larger and smaller counties. Is there anything that you'd like to add to what Regina said? You can go in any order.
My county is about half the size of Regina's, but we as well have a ballot sorter, the Agilis Duo, and then obviously our citizen judges are the ones that are actually doing the signature verification. It's just the technology from the Duo helps us process many more ballots in a more efficient way, and the judges don't have to actually handle the envelopes as much. They can just look on a screen and do their work for tier 1. We also can use that Agilis Duo, that technology, to make reports from, so that we can then audit the judges, like is somebody having too high of rejection rate, or is somebody not processing enough, or do we need more training in some aspect? But we're very similar to Regina's process.
Fantastic. Todd?
Sure. Denver County is about 500,000 voters. We also use an Agilis machine. Agilis has most of the Colorado market, except for one county. We use the full-size machine, and we do use automatic signature recognition. The software platform that we use for that is called Periscript. They're very common software, especially in the banking business, credit card, et cetera, et cetera. So our ballots run through the Agilis in the first round, and the software takes a look at the signature first off. The software for us approves about half of the signatures, and of those that the software approves, state law and rule mandates that we audit 1 out of 20, so 5%. And in the millions of ballots that I've seen go through automatic signature recognition in 3 counties, we've found a single oddity in all of those audits that was not really explainable. But after automatic signature verification, anything that's not approved by the system will go to a very similar system as Regina and Lori have. Tier 1 and tier 2, tier 1 being a single judge, tier 2 being a bipartisan team.
That's fantastic, Todd. And thanks for reminding us that for those counties that were using automatic signature recognition, there already was an audit component. So this wasn't an entirely new endeavor. Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot for just a minute. You get to work with all the Colorado counties now. So is it fair to say that the procedures Regina, Todd, Lori described, those are fairly standard across the state and the rest of the counties?
Yes, the standards are, the law is the law. Processes are substantially the same across all 64 counties. I think the biggest variance we have is those counties that do use technology, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 13 counties, I think, at this point. So the vast majority of our state does not use additional technology like an Agilis or ASR. And so they, we give them a hard time. They do it the old-fashioned way. So I would say those are where we see the differences in how signature verification works a little bit, but by and large, the laws are the laws, and people do their best to follow the law.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. So we're going to stay with you for just a minute. You were one of the main drivers to implement this type of audit in Colorado. Can you talk a little bit more about why you thought signature verification audits were needed? And I'd love to hear if there were some specific outcomes that you were hoping for, if you share those with us as well.
Sure. So this work really started in January of 2021, right? So it's right after the presidential election. Lots of questions, many legitimate questions, and as we know, some weren't so legitimate. But one of the things that we heard from people is when we would say, go talk to the trusted source, and that is your clerk and recorder, a lot of people who didn't like the answers because they had something else in their head about how the process worked would say, oh, I talked to the clerk. They say there's nothing to see here. They just put their head down and they just are moving forward. So given the environment that we were in, where there were legitimate questions too, we felt it was important that voters in Colorado heard directly from clerk and recorders about areas of improvement that we thought that we could make to help better improve the integrity of our elections. And so as you said at the top, we identified 4 places to start. It's not a complete list, but it's where we wanted to start. One was the SIGVER audits, voter registration audits, making ballots and cast vote records available at no cost after each election, and then modernizing the way that we fund elections, which I'm proud to say we got that done in our legislature this year, where the state now reimburses counties 45% of the election costs. A bigger hill to climb is going to be getting the federal government to pay their fair share, but we'll save that for another day. But then when it came to starting in on these audits, we decided to start with signature verification audits. And it's important, our association, Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliateds, it was unanimous in terms of these are the 4 things we need to start with, and yes, go forward and let's see what we can conquer with this. So as an association, we put together a committee that included national election experts, state and local election experts in Colorado, and then some of our friends from the election integrity stakeholder community that are outside of the state and local umbrella. And 2 of them are on this call here, Neil McBurnett and Harvey Branscombe. Their voices have been really important in this process because it's easy for us as election officials to get so focused on our processes and maybe tune out some of the other things we're hearing from the outside. So to have Harvey and Neil involved in this process and to provide additional perspective that we hadn't thought of has been really invaluable. But the goal was, when we started this, it was a couple of things. One, how well is our signature verification process working? What are the what are standard accept and reject rates for signatures as they come through? Are there any gaps in our signature verification process, right? Until you really dive down into the data and understand the data, we can't really say with 100% certainty where the gaps are. And then finally, training. We know that this work, especially if we do it early in the election process, as ballots are first starting to come in, if there are errors being made, we can go to that judge or those judges, do a refresher course, and hopefully they start doing the job properly. And if not, then we need to make sure that we replace them. So that's where we started with that focus, understanding that this was only going to be one part of it. Then we would expand to include more compliance audits around the cure letters, as Regina was talking about. Are they going out on time? Are they coming back in on time? Are those letters being processed properly? So the idea was to capture all of SIGVER, but we started with this process of looking at the signatures to verify did our audit team agree with the disposition that was made and to move that signature to tier 1, from tier 1 to tier 2, or from tier 2 to a final rejection status. So it's a lot of work, and like with all of this, we're finding out it's a lot broader than we initially thought, but I think that's kind of the fun with it. I think what you have with all of us here are people who are very intellectually curious about this. We want to dive down into it, and so that's made the process a lot of fun for us too.
Thank you, Matt. That's such a great overview. And it, reminds me that even when we know we're doing a good job, having evidence to back that up is helpful. And I know I've appreciated working with you all and my time in Colorado, this sort of drive to continuously look for process improvements. And I've said many times that for election officials, that's one of the biggest benefits to doing an audit, is it helps you really understand your process. So thanks for sharing that with us. So let's talk about that initial pilot that happened in June of 2022. For a pilot, you guys did well in terms of the number of participants. There was Arapahoe County, Denver County, Logan, Pueblo, Weld, Chaffee, Eagle, Jefferson, La Plata, Lincoln, and Logan counties joining. Okay, wait, I might have mixed some of those together. Some of those joined in November 2022. So we had a few to start. That's right. And then we had a few more, I think, Weld, Chaffee, Eagle, Jefferson, La Plata, Lincoln, Logan. Those came in November. Is that correct? Does that sound right?
Logan was there for June as well.
Okay, thank you. That is just fantastic to have so many counties participating in a pilot program like this. And what I think is so interesting about Colorado is there's this healthy mix of small, medium, and large jurisdictions. And so, Lori, Todd, Regina, we're going to hear from each of you in just a minute about how the audit worked in your counties. But Matt, can you just kind of continue your narrative that you were giving us about the audit process and just give us a little more detail about how that worked generally?
Sure. So so far it's worked very well. When we started this process, we wanted to give counties flexibility, because when you're starting it, you aren't quite sure what impact it's going to have on their workload generally. So when we designed it, when we were creating our audit pilot document to start us off, which we're happy to share with anybody on the call, the idea was, okay, we will shoot for 1% of signatures that were adjudicated from the last election. So for the June primary in 2022, we looked to the June primary from 2020. And so that's how we figured out what that 1% was. But we also made clear, look, if you can get to 1%, that's great. If you can do more, that's even better. But if you can't get there, if you can do 0.5%, whatever, that data is going to be valuable to the process. So we gave a lot of leeway there. The other place where we gave leeway was, when do you conduct the audit? Do you focus on doing it early in the process? Do you spread it out evenly throughout the process? Or do we do like with our RLA, where you save it all for a particular day after the election to go and do it at one time? Most of the counties decided to do it throughout the process. As I mentioned before, one, to do it early so you can identify if there are any issues and try to correct that. But two, just to get a sense of what it would add to their workflow through each part of the process, including when we get to the day before an election day, when we get snowed under with ballots. And so that was a big thing for us to provide that kind of feedback. And then we created a standard form for people to fill out the information we were looking for. So that generally gives an overview of the audit. The other thing was, when we were putting it together, we did focus on trying to get medium, large, and small counties involved. I would say the one area where we made a mistake, we could have done a better job. We were so focused on the technology piece of it, so the counties that use technology, we only brought one county in initially, who was the old-fashioned county that doesn't use any technology. And when that was really short-sighted, because that's 50 of our 64 counties. And so that's one thing that we were a little short-sighted on. But otherwise, the clerks who did it were incredibly engaged. They followed the process well and did a great job reporting out the data.
That's great, Matt. And just so I make sure the audience is clear, when the auditors, if they disagreed with the initial disposition, that did not change whether an envelope was accepted or rejected.
That's correct. Colorado law will not allow that to happen. And so really it becomes a future-looking thing to improve training down the line and study, if there are issues, if there are certain things to look for when the audit team disagrees with the initial disposition of the signature. Are there trends in that we can look to improve our trainings down the line for?
Great, thanks. Todd, I'm going to go to you next. Tell us a little bit about how the audit worked in your county.
Sure. We are blessed with a brilliant data architect. Before I came to Denver, I made fun of that term, but he's so smart. And he helped us to automate our participation in the pilot. He wrote a Python script that takes Agilis data, and he built in a randomizer. And with the guidance of Neil McBurnett, he did a random seed for to set the randomizer. And then that gives us a worksheet for a pair of judges, bipartisan team pair of judges, to audit 5% of decisions that were made by the automatic signature verification, and then 1% of the decisions made by judges. And that's both approved and challenged. We trained our audit teams at the same time that we train our signature verification judges, but they are not part of the signature verification team. So that we're certain that they're not auditing their own work. They're given a blind worksheet with just the ballot ID, and they look up that image from the machine, and then they look up all of the signature images that we have available to us in the statewide voter registration system, and they record whether they approve or do not approve. So that when we compare the data after the audit, it's not an agree or disagree. It's if the differences between the original decision and then the audit decision. I won't talk about results yet, I suppose.
You'll talk about the results in just a minute.
Okay, super. And we are continuing it. We know the audit is continuing as well, but we've gotten good feedback from a lot of our local activists. So this is something that we will continue whether or not it goes statewide or not.
That's great, Todd. And I really appreciate that you're thinking about the auditor being independent than those that did the work. I think we all recognize that's an important principle in auditing. Lori, I'm going to go to you next. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how the audit worked in your county?
The audit, I kept thinking that I was going to be able to do the audit as the election was going on. I thought, oh yeah, no problem. But then craziness happens, and so I was one of the ones that did it after the fact. And to Todd's point about the training, we got to make sure that the auditors have gone through the training just like the signature verification judges have. And then there's a lot of the prep work ahead of time of sorting out the stuff, what you're going to do. We just decided to number the boxes just like we do with the RLA, and we pulled out a certain amount from each box and went that route. So it was kind of random, kind of not. I didn't have a fancy script or anything. I just kind of eyeballed it. But I think in the future, I would like to maybe audit more of the rejected signatures. So anyway, it was kind of a manual process of just pulling out a few from each box.
Thanks, Lori. I appreciate that. And yeah, that determining the sample size of both rejected or challenged and accepted, I think is important. That's certainly some feedback that we got when we put out our implementation guide around this. So thanks for mentioning that. Regina.
Yeah, I always get jealous of Denver County. Now I want a data architect, Todd. That's very cool. We also don't have a data architect, but we had been doing signature verification audits prior to the pilot, which is why we were happy to be part of the project, because you can always improve and learn and refine. Our process, we had a veteran signature verification judges, I should say, be part of the process. We would always make sure to have bipartisan audit judges, so it wasn't just one party or the other. And our process was to, we scan through our Runback Duo machine in batches of 50. So our instruction to the audit judge was to go to each batch. This was our randomizer, go to each batch of 50 and pull, just choose 3 ballots. They would, for our tier 1 audit, they would not touch the physical ballot. They would look at the image captured by our receiving machine, our sorter, and then compare it to the historical images in the statewide voter registration database. Same thing, they would either, mark, would you have accepted that or would you have rejected it? When it came to the tier 2 rejects, which we also audited prior to the pilot, they would look at the physical ballots that were rejected or accepted, and again, make that determination. Would they have made the same decision? So it was, the randomization was through the choices made by our citizen election judge auditor, and we would do it throughout the election cycle. And so it was, that had been part of our process, and so we were able to continue that through the pilot.
Thanks, Regina. And I just remember, as we were trying to think about how we were going to aggregate all of this data, the spreadsheets and things that you had already created in doing this prior to the pilot were so helpful. I want you all just to think back for just a minute. We can keep this pretty brief, but think back to that initial planning before the pilot took place. Were there challenges or concerns that you initially had, and like implementing a pilot like this? And just 1 or 2 sentences from each of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to continue, Jennifer. 2 concerns or just things to watch out for is we want to make sure that we are as efficient as possible in our processes. And so being able to balance efficiency and getting our ballots through, especially on election day, and also the ability to conduct the audit. And then the second thing that just I was not concerned about, but we have different realities in our different counties, from large counties to small counties, and we work really well together as an organization. So it's important that we develop this in a way that makes it feasible for every clerk, not just small counties or big counties.
Yeah, that's so important.
I was gonna mention the same thing as Regina, is to allocate your time. That's what I underestimated how long it was going to take to really dedicate it so that you could pull away, stop what you're doing, do the audit. So I just need to manage the time it takes during the election better.
Yeah, Lori, and I remember that being a concern for, I think, most of the counties that participated in the pilot was, wow, we already do a lot under really tight timeframes. How are we going to find time to add this in as well? Matt.
I was going to say, I think the workflow is a big concern. The other thing, something that surprised me as we started putting all of this documentation together, was how there's not really a standardization of terms across counties. I mean, we always know that there's going to be some differences between how Colorado refers to things and Utah, Jen, or Florida, or wherever else, but the wide range of terminology used by counties inside Colorado was something that we're still trying to work through. And my hope is that part of this audit process, this exercise that we're doing, will also include a standardization of terms, so that if we have an election watcher, Harvey Branscombe and Neil, they both like to go and watch different election operations. If they're hearing one thing in, let's say, Arapahoe or Denver, it means the exact same thing in Eagle and Chaffee. And I think that's part of that consistency will help with the audit, but it will also help us writ large as we would look to build confidence in elections if we're all singing from the same sheet of music.
I love that, Matt. I love standards. Claude, any challenges or concerns you had going into the pilot?
Sure. We were already doing the audits for the automatic signature recognition, but this really gave us a chance to reflect on how we were doing those audits. And when we agreed to do the pilot, we sort of rewrote our SOPs around how we were doing those audits as well. When we reflected on former audit practices, they really weren't what we wanted in the long term. So it was a good opportunity for us. Again, we're lucky we have aside from our tiny building, we have a great staff. And so it was, I think, probably easier for us to adapt than maybe some others.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I love pilots because it always creates this sort of safe space for us to learn how something works. We never come to these audit practices exactly right on the first try. So thanks. Lori, Regina, Todd, as we're kind of reflecting here about the pilot program, you all made the decision to participate, and you've mentioned, there's all this time and effort that you really went into doing this. And I think especially the time component certainly wasn't something that had been done before. And I'm curious, like, what was your why? What made you want to participate? And then Matt, I would love when they get done for you just to reflect on how you got the other counties to participate. Regina, I'll start with you.
Yep. Well, we are always, in Colorado, I feel really fortunate to be conducting elections here because we have a lot of great processes and procedures in place. And you do hear that term gold standard. What I love about working in Colorado is there is never a sense of complacency. We're always saying, all right, what can we do to improve the internal process as well as the data that we can show and the transparency that we can share with our voters. So was really happy to be part of the project so that we can create hopefully a model that really works for our state and again for every county, because my clerk partners, I empathize with those who have really small rooms and really small budgets. And so how can we create something that works for everybody and continue to advance election integrity and continue to improve the Colorado model? So those were my motivations. And I will say I have a great team that helps implement all of this, and they were all on board as well. So definitely takes a village.
Thanks, Regina. Lori?
I agree with Regina's comments. There was a time where I was getting phone calls from reporters for background information, and they were asking me all these questions about why is there this rejection rate or challenge rate in this county, and why is it different, and how do you do it? And so you start to realize that maybe we need a little more standardization. And I think that was a big driving factor for us to just, even with the terms of how we do it, following the statute, following the rules. And I feel like we then as a state can have a more standardized process and then keep continuing to make it better. But until we get everybody on board doing it the same way, not just with the technology, obviously, but in general, doing the same practices, I think that's just going to be the most helpful thing. And I really wanted to expand on training for my judges to do signature verification better. So those were my driving factors.
Thanks, Lori. I hope we get to talk about training a little bit at the end. Todd, what is your why?
Sure. And just to clarify, although Lori and Regina are elected clerks, I work for an elected clerk. So Matt had to get my boss, Clerk Paul Lopez, to agree to participation. So my boss agreed, so I agree. But in theory, I think it's a really strong message to send the public and to send activists that we're serious about integrity, and we want to go above and beyond the law.
Thanks, Todd. And Matt, I know there are folks listening in from other states that might be thinking, how do I get a handful of my counties to do this? So anything you want to add about how you got such a large number of counties to participate?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the environment created a desire, as you've heard from Regina, Lori, and Todd, as election officials, had to deal with a lot of the claims after 2020. There was a general recognition for our folks that we needed to do more and move more towards evidence-based elections so that we can stand with confidence in whether in our office when we're talking to the public or out doing town halls, whatever that is, and say, look, we have the data to support what we're saying. We got there with RLAs, where that's been a tremendous tool for us in Colorado and in other states to be able to demonstrate that tabulation is working properly. But we need to focus on more of that evidence-based, mindset for the rest of elections too. So we just chose to jump in on SigVer. Our initial pilot counties were really excited to do it, had the bandwidth to do it. We have other counties who, noted, Jen, have jumped on in each subsequent election after that. One of the things we did after the June pilot, we have two conferences, annual conferences, summer and winter. We have members of our SigVer audit do presentations at each conference to say, okay, what has the workload been like? What have we found? And a lot of clerks who were interested but weren't sure they had the bandwidth, once they heard from their colleagues and friends about what actually happened, they were more and more willing to jump in because they want the data too. They want to help move the model forward and build voter confidence. So really, it was fairly easy. Just having grace for people who said, okay, I'm not sure I can do it now, but check back with me for the next election and when I can hear how it goes. And that was easy. The other thing was, there's a tendency to race and try to get to the finish line as quickly as you can. But when we started this, we knew it was going to be a year's project, take multiple years before we had something we were ready to recommend either for legislation or to be memorialized in our election rules. So we've started down this track. We're making good progress. We have a long way to go. But it's that general recognition too that it's not something that they have to jump into with both feet right now, and that we're going to move gradually until we feel like we're at a place where we have it right, and then have it move forward for everybody.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate that. Good reminder, there are no quick fixes. Well, let's dive into that data. So for the June primary, there were 4,410 signatures randomly selected for the audit. That was across all of the pilot jurisdictions. So that was what the workload looked like. We had 43 signatures that were challenged by the election judges that auditors said they would have accepted. And there were 11 signatures accepted by election judges that would have been challenged by the auditors. And just as a reminder again, that this disposition by the auditors did not, or the auditor's determination did not change at all the disposition that was originally given to that signature by the judge. Is there anything that you all learned, after that first pilot about conducting a signature verification audit? Anything you want to add from the findings other than the numbers that I just read off?
Yeah, I think, first of all, when you look at those numbers, and I think it's 98, 99%, whatever that is, the first response was, okay, thank God, right? It didn't show that there was this huge problem. And I think we all have confidence in what we do, but it's always nice when the data supports that. I think one thing we've also learned through this is there is so much, there's so much to this. It's so layered. If a ballot is referred to tier 2, there's a chance that that the ballot was, if the judge made a mistake at tier 1, that was corrected in tier 2, right? As you said in tier 2, Jen, if we found a mistake, we can't go and fix it real time like that. And finally, one of the things that we talked a lot about, especially in the early going, is this is somewhat subjective, right? The way that Jen and I can look at two different signatures right now, she might accept it, I might reject it. It doesn't, how do you determine what is the weight of the audit versus the initial disposition? We're still diving down into some of these things. What does that mean down the line? In Colorado, our rule at tier 2 is a ballot is not rejected. So if we have two judges, as Regina said, if both judges agree the signature should be accepted, it moves forward. If both judges agree the signature should be rejected, the ballot stops, the cure process is initiated. If one of the judges, if they disagree at tier 2, one accepts, one rejects, then the tie goes to the voter and the ballot moves forward. So it only takes one accept through that whole process. So it's a very layered, textured conversation here, and that's one of the things that we're trying to get through with this is what exactly does it mean? But truth be told, we're just grateful that there wasn't there wasn't this huge disagreement with the audit judges.
Thanks, Matt. Lori, Todd, Regina, anything else you want to add there in terms of takeaways from that initial pilot or any of the pilots that you've done?
I will just say that Matt put together a really great team of counties and of activists and the parties. We had party representatives, we had mathematicians, we had certainly national experts on the development team. So I think that really led to a much more dependable set of data.
Thanks, Todd.
Yep, I'll tag on to Todd's comment by saying it was really helpful, even though we had been doing these audits in Eagle County, learning from our peers, learning from our outside participants like Harvey and Neil, and getting different perspectives from everything, like Matt said, from standardized nomenclature to just different ways of thinking about some of the small things. How we did the audit was great for us to continue to refine the process that we already had in place. So that was a great learning opportunity for us.
Great.
I'll just tag on saying it was such a great learning experience, and we weren't just talking amongst ourselves. We invited other folks into the conversation, and I certainly learned a lot. Thanks,
Lori. We've got an audience question, and it feels like this is a good point actually to bring this up. What is the value of auditing the challenge vote by mail ballots if state law requires 3 separate election officials to agree that the vote by mail ballot envelope signature possesses multiple significant and obvious differing characteristics when compared to all signatures in the voter's record? So Matt, you kind of started to touch on that there's already this layered approach. Why did you decide to include the challenge signatures in the audit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because the answer is we don't know. You're right that for a ballot to be rejected, it has to be rejected at tier 1 by one judge and by both judges at tier 2. But there are circumstances inside tier 2 that it's worthwhile to take a look at. And if there's a problem, identify the problem and fix it. You know, it's not uncommon if you have a dominant judge who is taking lead of the conversation, and perhaps the second judge is a little bit meek and just is agreeing to agree or to avoid any conflict. You know, there are things like that can happen that I think we have seen happen, at least on a very small limited basis. So I would say any opportunity to validate or audit any part of the process, just to make sure there are no gaps or no issues, I would say the juice is worth the squeeze on that.
Great, thank you. And we've got another question around those verification teams, those signature verification teams. Question is, are they bipartisan, and are there standards in place when assigning those teams? Regina or Lori, do one of you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to. Yes, we have a bipartisan team that works together, and we have our internal training program that we use. And as I mentioned earlier, for our auditing judges, we've used judges in the past who have done signature verification, and from our experience and their experience, like done it very well, understand the process, understand the training, and have had quite a bit of exposure. We use them for our auditors. We have one auditor. I think Todd said he had 2. We have one person, but we are one person, I should say, at a time. They're not like tier 2. Our tier 2 judges work together, and they talk about what they're seeing with the signatures when they're trying to come up with that final disposition. Our audit process, we have the judge working by themselves to audit it, but we're always making sure to have bipartisan representation for the audit judges.
Great, thanks, Regina. Well, we are slowly getting to the end here, and so I don't want to end without asking all of you to just, as we think about these audit findings, right? And you have collected now this data over several pilots, but I'm really interested in what areas for improvement you've identified in terms of your signature verification process. So we've kind of talked about the judges and the training and some of the elements that go into that process, but I'm curious if there's anything as a result of the audit that you've changed about your process or identified that you'd like to change in the future. So Todd, I think we'll actually start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. We have expanded our training. The Secretary of State in Colorado provides a standard booklet to train signature verification judges that we all work from. And it is a really great, fairly comprehensive guide. But we've really amped up our training and done some sample signature verification during training so that they're not training on live ballots. And that's been, I think, really helpful.
Nice, thanks. Lori.
That just what Todd said is the main thing that we've been concentrating on is better training. And I've got an internal training document now, and a lot of it came from Jennifer. I was at a conference and she presented another type of training manual for signature verification that was more broad. And so I took her material and made it for Colorado. And it's been so helpful. We're excited that we have something else to go along with the state's training. Like Todd said, it's great and everything, but I tend to have the same judges work each time, and maybe that gets a little static. And so I'm excited to have this new look and this new training for this upcoming election.
Awesome, Lori, thanks. Regina.
Yeah, I'll be a broken record on the training piece, but that really is so important. And again, we look to our other county partners. Like if we hear that Denver County or other county, Boulder County, larger counties have resources or different guides, we're always reaching out saying, hey, can you share that? Because it's great to just the more robust training that we can have, and that we are to the largest degree possible as each county training our judges in a similar fashion, so that we're doing an audit in the same way, but we can have the greatest confidence possible that our judges are going underneath the same guidelines and having the same training is really helpful. And I know we all partner together to try to continue to up our training opportunities.
Thanks, Regina. Matt, certainly if there's anything you'd like to add, but also if you can do it quickly, we've got one last question I'll pose to you, and that is, are you coordinating with Vote by Mail, Washington State's efforts to standardize SigVer? Sorry, this is an audience question.
To that question, no, but we're always happy to. I think one of the great things about our election community across the country is that everybody's willing to share as much information as possible. It makes us all better and stronger. So no, but that's something I'll look into for sure.
And anything you want to add in terms of improvements to Colorado's signature verification process that you've seen as a result of the audit? Or
I think they covered it. I think generally, the training is a big thing, but I also, for the pilot counties, I think there's even a greater emphasis on attention to detail when doing this work and how important it is. And anytime we get to zero in on that and renew the focus on that and the training, it makes the process stronger.
well, thank you all so much. Election audits like these are what really help us foster and build trust in election administration. So just really want to thank you all for participating today. I hope that this has been beneficial and helpful for those of you that are listening. We do have a slide that we want to share. Let's see, Rebecca, do you want to pop that up? Hang on 1 second. Okay, so before we leave, the Colorado Signature Verification Audit Pilot Program certainly has helped inform some of the audit research we've done here at the Elections Group. It's also been really helpful in the creation of some signature verification training for election officials. Lori mentioned that. Those of you that might be interested in viewing that training, or you want to submit some feedback on any of the guides, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll share that training with you at support@electionsgroup.com. We've put links again, or will be putting links here in a minute in the chat, both to our Exploring Election Audits report, part 2 report, that is specifically this similar process to what you just heard from the folks from Colorado for conducting a mail ballot validation audit. And one thing I'd like to add is we spend a lot of time talking about signature verification as a method of validating mail ballots, recognizing that there are other methods used in different states, but we feel like this type of audit can be applied to those other methods as well. So please feel free to take a look at either of those links that we've put there. And just thank you again to everybody who tuned in today and made this. And those of you that participated, thank you so much. I know you are all running an election right now, so thank you for your time. You've certainly made this a success.